Lower cost energy, lower cost transportation, lower cost labor means lower cost everything. And we can call this sustainable abundance. And when you go from one system to another, you kind of have to rewrite almost everything. And that includes politics, it includes money, it includes a whole bunch of things, but they're all related. And so it's going to be a great time of prosperity, but it also is going to be a massive time of upheaval. And so I'm excited about where we're going. I'm very concerned about the transitionary period and the disruptions that will occur, policies perhaps that may be put in place that will actually end up hurting us than helping us.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show. As you know, we are in season 5. We're talking about abundance and we're talking about the future. And we have an awesome guest that I'm very grateful that he's making time. Welcome to this show, Cern Basher.
Hi, AXEL. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and thank you for making it possible. As you said, it took us a little bit to get here, but I'm a super fan of the stuff that you're posting, and I want to tell the audience and really encourage them to look at what you put, especially on X, because there's a lot of stuff out there, no doubt about it. But if somebody really wants to gain an understanding, I would say that's what makes you special, because you're really going deep and really explaining and educating the people who are willing to spend the time. And I'm really grateful, because there's always a little bit of something that I may have not thought about. And I'm thinking our audience or any other audience out there would have the same experience. And we have access to all this amazing information basically for free. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. You know, it's interesting because I started out initially, I had an interest, in Tesla, and I started looking at the robotaxi business. And one of my early posts on X was a model that I built for robotaxi and what the economics of the business might look like once it was at scale. It's sort of a unit economic model. And that caught the eye of James Dalma. You probably know James Dalma, really smart guy, important name in the Tesla community. Elon, I think, follows him. And Elon responded to James's comments on my post. And Elon's comments were very simple. All he said was, "You understand, but few do." And that was enough to sort of, enough impetus for me to kind of go a little bit deeper. It's like, oh, I must be onto something here if I'm uncovering something that's resonating with both James and Elon. And then from there, I built a unit economic model for the humanoid robot, Optimus. And a similar sort of thing happened. And so since then, I've just really been focused on trying to understand the potential of Tesla at different points in time as they scale these businesses. And I guess that was a lens that few people were sort of looking at the businesses through. A lot of people sort of try to find fault with, Cern's predictions are wrong. For me, it's not about making predictions. It's about looking at what's possible. You can certainly look at some of the numbers and say, oh, the number in 2030 is XYZ. That can be proven wrong. Again, for me, it's not about making predictions. It's about testing assumptions and trying to understand these businesses more deeply. And so it's been quite an interesting journey.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a great service that you're providing. It's also, in my opinion, one thing that helps people like me, for example, who is not necessarily coming into the whole stock investing because that's my main thing. Our audience knows that we're focusing on real estate investing. But the other thing is to really have an opportunity to understand companies and what they do a little better. And for me, part of it is to really very clearly become aware how shallow most of the stuff that is being distributed broadly by the writers and by the business community, even some of the analyst community. I mean, I like a lot of the people in that community, but I have to say, if all you do is looking at current earnings and then calculate it forward, and if that doesn't get you to the share price, then you either have to sell or to wait. That's, to me, now that I know that there is so much more, it's super shallow, right? It makes the whole thing super easy. It also makes me wonder how often people are really concerned about the performance of their money. right? Yes, when everything goes up and you see whether it's your mutual fund, your 401k, or whatever may be, that you made another 11.8% last year, yeah, that feels good. But then, why that happens and what the drivers are. And, I always call it jokingly the S&P 490, and then there's the S&P 10. But before we go further there, let's wind back a little bit. I mean, I'm just making a broad assumption here that Cern didn't, graduate from school and then said, "Oh, let me do an investment company." So how tell us a little bit about the history.
Sure, I'll give you a very abbreviated version of it. I was born in the South Island of New Zealand,
Oh, good.
and lived there for the first 10 years of my life. Wonderful childhood, a lot of freedom. I think we, would go play and came home only when we were hungry. So it was a different time where parents didn't have to worry about the safety of their kids. But at age 10, my family decided to move to Canada. Actually, it was the second time that my parents moved to Canada. They had moved there early on, and initially got married in Canada, came back home to New Zealand to take care of some aging parents, and then moved back again. So at that point, I was 10 years old, and I have two brothers that are older than me that are Canadian born. So I was the youngest and New Zealand born. And when I moved back to when we moved to Canada, something really changed in me. I went from being a very shy kid that wasn't particularly good in school to all of a sudden a kid that was very curious, and I became actually a very good student and also a pretty good athlete. And so at the end of high school, first year of college, I went to a Canadian university. First year of college, I was recruited to a U.S. college with a track and field scholarship.
Okay.
And so there was a good 10 years of my
Ice
life
hockey.
there.
Most people say, "Oh, sports Canada must be ice hockey."
Well, by the time I moved to Canada at age 10, if you're not, if you didn't learn to skate before you learned to walk, ice hockey wasn't going to be in your future. And so I missed that opportunity.
I thought the
Um,
people who don't do that they do curling. And
yeah, there are kids in Canada that learn to play hockey or skate or ski before they can walk. And that just wasn't my opportunity. I love to ski and I love to play hockey, but I'm not really good at either one of them. Um, so anyway, journey to the United States for college, that was a great experience. I was a runner for about 10 years. I was the Canadian junior cross country champion, and I got to compete in the world championships. And so that was an interesting period in my life, but I quickly realized that running wasn't going to be my long-term future. And fortunately, I got a degree in finance, and then I started the CFA program, the Chartered Financial Analyst program, which is a global program that really teaches you the fundamentals about valuing companies and investing in general. And that was really sort of the key thing I think that set my future career off. Um, and then I moved to the United States. I've been here now for over 30 years. And initially, I worked for a bank during the dot-com boom. I probably have actually one of the best mutual fund track records of anybody for a 5-year period during that dot-com boom. And I left the bank to start my own investment company at the peak. So in October of 2000, I left that. So my mutual fund track record is, in fact, it's pristine. Uh, Compound capital about 3% per year for 5 years. Started an investment company, and ever since then, for the last 25 years now, I've been an independent registered investment advisor.
so when you said you left at the peak, does that mean you sold all the dog.com and petfood.com and stuff at the right time?
Well, if I stayed, I would have, but because I left, that was now somebody else's problem.
Okay, but you didn't go back into the same stuff. I'm hoping for your benefit.
Well, certainly starting a company at the peak of any market is difficult. So there was a 2.5 year bear market after that. So it was certainly a very difficult time to start a business, much less just be in an existing investment advisory business.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, for me, that was part of the reason how I ever got into real estate, because I started my company in 1st of May 2005, and it was just still too fresh. So not, I didn't have huge losses or something like that, but having some interest in money and investing and stuff, and having heard for, like you said, 2.5, 3 years since the crash, which led almost exactly to when we started the company, that how bad it is and still not anywhere nearly recovered and so forth. I said, well, that sounds risky. And now you have to keep in mind, at the time I was basically turning 45. It wasn't like, I have another 30 years of work life ahead of me. So that was the other thing. But yeah, I can relate. You didn't say anything about it, so you just hung out in like Brazilian hangouts, or how did you start your family?
I met my wife online, as a lot of people do these days. She's from an Italian family born in Brazil. And yeah, so I sort of consider our family as kind of citizens of the world. Between my wife and I, we have 5 different passports. So sometimes it's a little tricky figuring out which passport to travel on. A couple of times I've entered countries with one passport, and the immigration agent pushes it back and says, "Have you entered this country on a different passport before?" So that's happened to me a few times.
Yeah, well, I have a few, not that many as you have, but you're right. It's helpful to pay attention which one have you used where. But one thing that I very vividly remember, just as a little anecdote for the audience, is I used to do a consulting project for a company north of London that I needed to fly into basically every 2 months for like 4 weeks or so. And if you came in international flight, something like a 747 or so from LA, you had 300 like North Americans and a handful, very few Europeans.
Hmm.
So the lines were just insane. So I always entered Britain with my German passport, and when I went back, I used the US one, because it's vice versa, right? So you're coming from London, the whole plane is full of Brits and Europeans, and then you can go as, through the other line where nobody goes.
Yeah, that's very handy.
But people always said, like, I thought I don't understand, how can you be like 2 hours after you landed, you're already here having the first meeting. I said, yeah, I never have to wait. I just walk right through. So that was pretty good. All right. Now, I think for our conversation, where I kind of want to start getting more into the topic of Tesla and investing, is this relatively recent. And I should tell you, this season 5 that we're in our podcast, the heading was, until a few days ago, let's explore the age of abundance.
Yeah.
Now, a little bit relating to Tony Siever's book Stella, and some of the other stuff that other people talk about. Now we basically added a little word called sustainable. So we're calling it now the age of sustainable abundance. And I think that's pretty much a good starting point to ask you, what's your interpretation? What do you think, with the limited information we got in this kind of very abbreviated master plan 4, what is really meant by it? And not only how does it impact all the different things that Tesla and maybe to some extent other Elon companies doing, but if you're going a little bit beyond, say, okay, for Cern, his family, his kids, AXEL, his family, his kids, and others out there, what do you see happening there with this emerging age of sustainable abundance?
Yeah, this is a big topic, Axel. We could talk about this for hours.
Oh,
Right. The way I see it, and I think Tony Seba probably has done the best work to date on this in terms of talking about what's coming. And I think it's really quite simple, in the sense of, we now have a set of technologies that are going to drive down the cost of energy towards zero. Not zero, but just towards zero. It's going to decrease the cost of energy over time. We also have technologies that are going to drive down the cost of transportation. towards zero. That's autonomous electric vehicles and trucks. We also have technology now that we're developing that will drive down the cost of labor towards zero. And this is a fundamental threat to human labor. And human labor is how people earn income and provide for their families. So this is a big transition that we have to face. And then with AI in general, we have developed technologies that is going to drive down the cost of intelligence towards zero. Lower cost energy, lower cost transportation, lower cost labor means lower cost everything, from food to housing, education. So we're going to be faced with a level of deflation from technology that we've never seen before, kind of hitting all at once. So this is a fundamental change from the economic system that you and I have grown up in to a new economic system. And we can call this perhaps sustainable abundance. So it's very clear to me that this is a shift basically in everything. And when you go from one system to another, you kind of have to rewrite almost everything. And that includes politics, it includes money, it includes a whole bunch of things that may seem tangential to the things that we're talking about today, but they're all related. And so it's going to be a great time of prosperity, but it also is going to be a massive time of upheaval. They're two sides of the same coin in essence. And so I'm excited about where we're going. I'm very concerned about the transitionary period and the disruptions that will occur, the policies perhaps that may be put in place that will actually end up hurting us than helping us. Things like that. So regarding the second part of your question about how this impacts, families, I think in a time of disruption and transition and massive change and all these unknowns that's coming, we need to make sure we're putting ourselves in the best possible position. And one of those things is financially.
Right.
Right. If you're going to go into a famine, you want to go in with as much food as possible. And this could be a bit of an economic famine for many. And so you want to try to husband as much capital as you can. Hopefully, on the other side, you don't need much capital because we live in this low-cost, sustainable, abundant world where you can have anything for almost free. But getting to that point, I think, could be an interesting challenge for many people.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about, and I would be curious your opinion, when we're looking at different ideas of how to use money, let money work to get to a certain goal or to a certain endpoint. One approach that didn't work so well when you have high inflation, but generally as a concept, is called the FIRE movement. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you're aware. Now, when I take what you just said, some people I've spoken to and read about seem to indicate, okay, we don't know exactly how much time we have. And the idea of the FIRE movement is more to be seen as a concept. So it's not so much relevant if you do stock investing or if you do real estate investing or you believe in gold and Bitcoin, all good, or maybe a combination if you do a diversified portfolio. But the point is more, how frugal can you be during this time, as Tony calls it, the transition from the age of extraction to the age of sustainable abundance, not knowing really how long that time is, but if you really want to prepare, like accumulating food, good thing is with money, it doesn't go bad. It might be inflated, but and it depends on the kind of money. If you do Bitcoin and gold and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
dollars and euros and pesos and stuff, maybe not so much.
Not
but
so much.
my point is more, would you say that would be good advice for people to say, okay, it's not so much where you are right now, the more you already have accumulated food, quote unquote, in that analogy, the better. But if you haven't done much, you can kind of catch up through frugality. So my question is, do you think that makes sense? And how long do you think until these really significant impacts will start showing up in the sense of maybe not too late, but Alexandra, when I spoke to her, said we're going to go down to $1 an hour wage, right? So that's not going to be overnight, but it's coming.
Yeah, these are the issues of our time for all of us, right? And unfortunately, we are the generations that are going to have to deal with this. Very infrequently do we see systemic changes like we're about to go through. So part of it hinges upon when we're going to have AGI and ASI. And, whether it's in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years remains to be seen, but it's coming probably within the next decade and maybe on the sooner side than the later side. Right. And so, yes, if we can see, and again, from an economic perspective, it's very clear we're going to have massive deflation. So if you are relying on regular income to fund your needs, first of all, that income source might be at jeopardy. If it is, and I think we should assume that everybody's income source pretty much is in jeopardy in some way or another. There's a few jobs perhaps that are safe for a long while, but maybe less than you think. So from that perspective, then how do you ensure that if you are forced into a situation where your income is lower, you're able to survive? Well, to your point, being frugal is key to that. Now, the good news is that because these things are deflationary, the cost of the things that we're going to buy probably will start going down too. So, in that sense, depending on the timing of everything, you may see your cost of living going down as your income also potentially might be going down. Now, I recognize too that in all of human history, that every time a new technology has come along, we've always created more higher paying jobs than we lost. Is this different this time? Potentially. First of all, I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope that AI and humanoid robots create more jobs and job opportunities for humans, and I think in certain areas they will for a while. But I do see a point that at some point they can pretty much do everything that we can, almost without exception. It's just that transitional period. And unfortunately, we're going to have to live through that transitional period. Now, if you don't take the position of, oh, I'm going to be responsible for myself and my family, then you're just leaving it in the hands of the government. And the question is then how are governments going to treat their citizens? Well, they have to treat them reasonably well, otherwise citizens will rise up and overthrow their governments. The question is, as an individual, do you want to subject yourself to that risk?
Yeah, exactly. Now, one thing that I've been wondering, and I really feel that you're the perfect person to ask this. When I look at your things that you publish and many other people who are basically in the money world and money system, let's take one term that is frequently used lately is this whole idea of total addressable market for something.
Mm-hmm.
If it's cars or robots or other stuff. That from to put a number on it in any case, and even if most people, credible people say, yeah, okay, there is a certain aspect of calculation, speculation, assumptions involved. What I'm wondering, and this is where my question goes towards, okay, we have real estate, we have stocks, you have stocks, you probably have some other things as well. Valuation in the age of sustainable abundance, I'm struggling and I'm wondering if you have a little bit of an explanation. How would that actually work? If we're saying right now, Cassie Wood says Tesla in 2030 is 2,600 a share. Well, yeah, if you take current ways of calculating, looking at it, valuing it, and so forth, do you have any kind of way for somebody who says, okay, I hear what you say, Cern, Axel, about where we're going, but if I'm buying stock, for example, this valuation when labor costs nothing and all these other things basically cost almost nothing, how does that actually work?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think there's different sort of layers to this, or different time frames. And that's going to break it down to the different time frames. The first time frame is, let's use a very specific example of Tesla and a humanoid robot.
Okay.
They're taking human labor, which right now is something that is not capitalized in the stock market unless you're looking at a football or soccer team. They're able to capitalize the wages of their players, and it's reflected in their stock price. But for most of us, our labor is not traded on the stock exchange anywhere. Company employees walk out the door every day. It's an expense to the company. Companies don't get to apply a multiple to what they're paying their employees and capitalize that. With a humanoid robot, let's say the robot initially makes $25,000 a year in profit, and it's robots as a service. So Tesla's making 25,000 every year on each robot. If the stock market applies a PE multiple, just to pick one of 40 to that, then each robot they put in service is worth $1 million to Tesla's market capitalization. So in essence, they're taking something that has no market value at all right now, and out of thin air, capitalizing it and turning it into valuation in the stock market for every robot that they produce. One robot is a million robots is $1 trillion of value. And for a company like Tesla to make 1 million robots and generate $1 trillion of stock market value is not a big lift given their manufacturing capability. So that's the first phase, where we're taking something that's not reflected in the stock market and we're capitalizing it and creating stock market value. The second phase is one where we are ramping up production of robots. And so initially they'll command very high prices because of what they're capable of doing. They might replace one worker, but 3 shifts worth.
Right.
So that robot is tremendously valuable. The other thing that's going on as AI gets more capable, the work that robot can do will be ever increasing. It will start replacing, let's say, $5 an hour work initially, and then $10 an hour labor, and then 15, 20, 30, 40. It's going to move up that value chain very quickly and replace those high-cost workers. So the value of the robots actually grows initially as they start to ramp. It's a combination of rapid growth in the number of bots and also rapid growth in their capability and therefore value. So that might be a situation then where the PE multiple goes up and the profitability per bot goes up. And so one bot might be worth initially $1 million, and then one bot might be worth $5 million in stock market value. Then we get to the third phase, where the deflationary effects really kick in and the cost of labor start to come down. There's competition. It's not just Tesla. There's other companies making millions or hundreds of millions of these things. And we're truly driving down the cost of labor. And that's kind of to your point. What happens at that point? Well, Elon's talked about having billions of bots in the world. And so I've run the numbers. Even billions at very low labor rates can create hundreds of trillions of value. Not to mention the off-planet uses of robots. If we are to extend our footprint beyond Earth, we're going to do it with robots initially first for the majority of what we do. So this is where Tesla and SpaceX are closely linked. Sending humans to Mars right now is very problematic. If they even survive the journey, getting there and remaining healthy would be a challenge. It's going to make much more sense to send the robots in first. So what I'm trying to say is that the TAM, the market opportunity for robots in numbers, is in the tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of these things eventually.
Yeah,
Right.
I agree with you. And you know, I've said many times, I want one. I know my wife wants one, and I'm sure my daughter wants one. And so from that perspective, and Elon has a point when he says, well, you know, then in whatever your work is, you might want one too, you know, not as an individual, but for the company. So the other aspect that I think is somewhat interesting to illuminate a little bit is when we're taking all that you just described, and I at least think, regardless how much we're projecting into the future, you take a stock, whether you take Tesla or any other one, I've always learned, you tell me if that's wrong, the price that you get is basically what somebody else is willing to pay. Which leads me to the question, if those who listen to us and watch us today, and whenever in the future they get to the video or to the audio, don't take your advice to say, accumulate as much food or money or investments as you can in this transitionary period, will there only be a limited number of people that needed that advice or already have a lot in that direction to be able to pay any price that might be a fair value? And will then the rest who don't do it, couldn't do it for whatever reason, be left behind? And you know, and by some people's estimates, it's a 90-10 or something like that ratio. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the uncertainties. Now, when I listen to Elon talk about this, for robotaxi, for example, he's always talked about people being able to buy robotaxis, cybercabs, add them to the fleet, and earn a source of income. When I run the numbers, it makes more sense for Tesla to do everything itself. If they were truly trying to maximize every last dollar of profit, they should build the vehicles, keep everyone themselves, don't sell cars to people anymore, put them all in the robotaxi and earn as much money as they can. Elon doesn't talk that way. Elon talks about giving people the opportunity to make money. And I think it's also likely true with the humanoid robots. Even again, when I run the numbers, it makes more sense for Tesla to operate the fleet themselves and not share any revenue with anybody. They run the risk, I think, of antitrust kind of situations when they're at scale with that. And so I think Elon recognizes that risk, but he also recognizes the risk that, hey, you need to have people earning some income.
Yeah,
Right.
if I may adapt, my perspective is a little bit more from what is happening until. What I mean by that is, if you say, okay, that moment where the manufacturing capacity is there with Cybercab and so forth, to really say, okay, are we going to sell them into fleet operators? Are we operating them ourselves or not? And especially now, if the vote goes through with the new pay package, I don't see any reason why Elon would want to wait 10 years. If he can get the production up to 20 million units, he probably will.
Yeah.
But that also means, let's just say we're going to add 1 million, and outside of Cybercab, 1 million more per year going forward of whatever the different vehicles are. You're getting pretty quickly to like a 10 million fleet, a 15 million fleet. By 2030, we would probably have anywhere between 15 to 20 million in the existing fleet. Especially, I know a bunch of people, especially in Europe, who have a 2008 Model S and no reason to change the car because it's fine. They probably got 1 or 2 battery replacements on warranty. Everything else is good. They get still OTA. Yeah, their hardware is not the most modern, but it's not like it used to be where you say, okay, I drive a car for like maybe 3 or 4 years at the most, or however long my lease term is. My point is more, okay, the fleet is going to grow and grow and grow. And when you combine it with this idea of, okay, labor is basically trending towards free, then it's potentially, like you said, this adding an opportunity to make some money, but it's also, what do we do with the existing fleet, right? Because I am seeing not just the fleet in the sense of people operating it itself. I would go as far as saying, even though it sounds completely counterintuitive today, that the regulators will see, okay, these 45,000 dead people every year in the United States alone, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to mandate that you can only drive with FSD engaged. But then the step to adding it to a fleet for robotaxi makes much more sense. So that's a little bit of my view on that. Now, piggybacking right on that, Elon said, oh, no, we don't have UBI, we're going to have UHI.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how that works?
Well, in theory, if you look at this, the supply side of things, right? So again, if we have cheap, abundant energy that costs less and less and less over time, transportation, labor, intelligence, right? So from a supply perspective, we almost have unlimited ability to make everything that we want.
Right.
We can, with cheap energy, we can desalinate water to our heart's content. We can make forests in the deserts, right? We can build things cheaply with low cost transportation, energy, labor. It also allows us to extract raw materials more cheaply, right? So all these things kind of feed on each other. And so, in theory, again, from a supply side, we have the ability to create an unlimited amount of stuff, whatever that stuff needs to be. And it might be that we direct that effort towards stuff that's going into space because that's the new frontier. And the way I think of space, very simply, it's like we're developing or discovering a whole new continent. We could see it, we just couldn't get there cheaply. And so we've kind of ignored it and said, okay, maybe one day we'll figure it out. But now we have the ships with Starship to get up there cheaply and actually do something in space, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's mining asteroids, whether it's going to Mars, whether it's doing something on the moon, all those things combined. Pharmaceutical production in space. There's all kinds of benefits to putting production in space. We may even put energy generation and AI data centers in space. There's just all kinds of, it's really unlimited in terms of what we can do there. So that is, the massive long-term opportunity where humans can kind of grow into this new continent, so to speak, right? And look at the value creation that was created as we developed North America. People came to the New World, right? This is like that, but only 100, 1,000 times bigger opportunity, right? So again, I feel sort of like we're talking about all kinds of different things here, but the transition of all this, I think, is really dangerous because the inclination for politicians is going to be to protect human jobs. But it's those very high cost human jobs that are the problem in the first place. That in economic theory, if you could eliminate that high cost barrier, that friction, then we would all be better off. Right? It's great that you pay a truck driver, so many dollars per mile, but if you can get that cost of transportation down to cents per mile, society at large is better off. And so it's just this push and pull, I think, between the capabilities that we'll have at low cost to produce whatever we want with the economic realities of people and what they need to survive and the political forces in between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even want to go speculate what the political forces in different systems are. I'm currently, just for the audience to know, if you, not you, Cern, but somebody were to ask me, I have the suspicion that the centralized systems, and I don't want to use any of these mass media terms, but the centralized systems, like they are, for example, in China, seem to have a little bit of an advantage, not just because they're more stable as far as leadership goes, but also because they're working more strategically versus this 4-year cycle, which in many ways is really only a 3.5-year cycle now. Why I kind of led our conversation in that direction a little bit is, whether you call it universal basic income or universal high income, if you go a little bit towards, Star Trek or something like that, I wonder if abundance just means access to everything that you need as a human being, as a fundamental given, right? Like in any European country where I'm coming from, I don't know exactly how it is in New Zealand, but I'm assuming I know for a fact in Canada, healthcare is not a question of whether it's a right or not. It's just assumed, it's automatic. And
Right.
I'm hoping that the US is ultimately also coming around to it. But in the sense of what does abundance mean, to me, that's one of these aspects to say, okay, is there a point where humanity can evolve to a point where you don't need to exchange little pieces of green paper or send numbers through digital connections from one digital account to another digital account to value things. Now, this is not, I'm not saying I'm expecting this in 5 or 10 years, but when you say what's the trajectory, where we really going, anybody who is a Star Trek fan would know, have you ever seen anybody pay for anything? It just doesn't exist, right?
Right.
So, and I think
it's very similar, Axel, to what's happened in the cell phone market or the telecommunication market, right? We used to charge people by the minute for their communications, right? Long distance calls were super expensive, international calls ridiculous, right? And what happened now with the technology we have, it's too cheap to meter, so they just charge a flat fee, flat rate. And I think we may see the same thing eventually with energy. We already see the same thing with intelligence. I pay a certain flat rate for ChatGPT and Gemini and Grok, essentially, right? Right. And so the same thing will be true with labor, perhaps. We'll pay a flat rate for that, flat rate for energy, a flat rate even for food, potentially. It's just, pick a number per month and you get all the food that you need. So I think we can look to the telecommunications business for kind of how that evolves. And I think that's going to happen with virtually everything.
very good. Yeah, I think that is definitely at least one vision, one way to look forward. Now, before we quite get there, and I'm excited, I think it's actually like Elon says it oftentimes, lots of politicians lately seem to come around to say I'm actually optimistic for the future because it holds so much potential. But when we're coming back to investing, I always preach for our real estate investing that we want to diversify. We want to have clusters in different locations. I wanted to ask you, when I look at the portfolio of companies that Elon Musk has created, Tesla being one that you and I frequently look at, that's pretty much the only one that I know right now that is still public. Would you see anything where this all becomes kind of part of like an ecosystem, a universe where all the different pieces, more than even today, would start work together to get to this sustainable abundance?
Yes, I do. The way I view Elon in particular is everything he is doing is really driving towards this opportunity in Mars. That's his mission in life, essentially,
Right.
is this, putting a copy of humanity on Mars, so to speak. And all of his companies, in my view, are related to that effort, and so they're all going to work together to get there. We also, Tesla right now is the only public company. The other ones are private. Now, there are some funds that people can buy to invest in those private companies. I also think that we're going to start to see more innovation of people being able to invest in private companies more directly. So that's something I think to watch for and stay tuned for. I would expect to see that in the next few years. I think this notion of the difference between a public and a private company, I think, will start to disappear. And then, of course, there's a larger ecosystem around that, right? It would be nice if Elon doesn't have to do everything. Certainly, NVIDIA is a key player in this whole AI space. It's allowing this proliferation of intelligence and the development of humanoid robots. Tesla certainly is a leader in the space, but there are lots of other companies that are participating in developing humanoids, and many of them are funded or partnered with NVIDIA. And of course, then there's a whole bunch of Chinese companies that are doing some pretty amazing things too. So, I think we're going to see more and more sort of opportunities outside of what Elon is doing, and that's encouraging. That's a good sign.
Yeah, I think there's not so much, and you never know, Elon might start another new company tomorrow, but I think there's a pretty impressive spread when you look at, for energy, for space, like you mentioned, for basically 3D transportation, right? I mean, I always like that analogy. We all were expecting flying cars. Maybe we need more tunnels.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the Neuralink thing to be, as Elon says, if we can get rid of the meat sticks and make it directly with telepathy, we can interact with the AGI that everybody is certainly somewhat afraid of. I call that, overcoming the zoo syndrome, where, like we like the monkeys in the zoo, but we don't really know what to do with them. That's kind of what I'm thinking. If we don't overcome this communication issue, that we can communicate with the ASI or AGI in some meaningful form, they might say, let's put these humans in the zoo. Nothing else
That's
to
right.
do. Or the zoo could be, I don't know, on the moon or wherever the zoo might be. So what I'm driving at here, maybe coming towards the end of the conversation, in a more immediate way. I mean, I know you giving advice to your clients in your company, but if we take it a little bit more beyond investing in stock, and I like this question. I know it's getting a little old, but I like this question since we both have kids, probably not the super youngest anymore, to say, well, what do I tell my kids to do? Well, how to imagine the future without being sure, being certain, but all the things that you study, all the things that you're doing, both from preparing for the drought that you mentioned, but then also in a sense of for investing, right? I would say if somebody asked me what is the biggest regret in your life, is that nobody told me how to invest when I was 18 or 20.
Mm.
Consistently my answer. So I think we have a responsibility in a way to help our offspring, so to speak, to know, at least give them an idea of how this could work. So what would you suggest for people that are listening or watching and saying, okay, so I heard all of this, what can I practically do to basically be prepared myself, and what can I tell my kids?
My answer is very simple and very straightforward, very direct, is integrate AI in every way possible that you can think of into your lives and your kids' lives. Resisting that is going to be a mistake. Everything that we do is going to be interacting with AI in some form. It's going to be an agent for us. It's going to do things for us. It's going to be an assistant. It's going to be, controlling many things in our lives. And so, to the degree that we can integrate it and get comfortable and used to it, I think you're doing a favor for your kids. I'm not suggesting that they, take their schoolwork and just get AI to do everything, but have AI review everything that they're doing in school. Have AI coach them. Have AI grade their work. Use AI in every way possible that you can think of to help them understand what this is and how to be better. It's an incredible tool. It's only going to get better. And if you're not used to using it, one day you're going to wake up and you might have a nasty surprise. Um, we don't know yet what the job market is going to be like for this next generation. I'm hopeful that we're going to create some amazing job opportunities for people, right? And so it's very clear, though, that those job opportunities are going to be all AI related, right? Whether it's building out AI data centers and the infrastructure, that's one side of things, but it's also learning to use these AI tools in the best way possible to make new scientific discoveries, drug discoveries, and so on. So again, just get as comfortable with AI as you possibly can, and help your kids do that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And I think that is very good advice. The other part, or the complementary part that I see in this context, is for the kid part, or for the early young adult, is to really pay way more attention. And I'm really trying to preach this almost like from a soapbox. Really try to find opportunities to discover what are you really passionate about, what you're really interested in, what you may even, depending on what it is, have a talent in. I mean, you mentioned that you were a runner and you were good in sports, and you kind of more or less suddenly found some affinity to learning, and maybe people like to teach, or like I have the impression you like to analyze based on the volume of analytics that you're doing. So I think it will be way more important. And why I'm saying this is I've gotten to know, because I was invited to teach at some universities for a few years, there were so many people there that had enrolled in a university that they had fought quite a bit to get into. And when you ask them, what's your major? What are you actually going to try to become? They didn't have very much of a good answer, if any. And I think that aspect is becoming more and more important as we're going through this transition, because I see, and we can have maybe, if you're willing, another interview and conversation about that. I really believe that one thing that we haven't really put in financial value on, at least to my knowledge, is this aspect of what can human beings do together when they don't have to go after the money that pays for all the essentials. Kind of
That's
like
right.
when we're going on Maslow's pyramid to like the middle or to the upper third. Say, okay, so all the essentials are taken care of. I have food, I have security, I have shelter, I have all these things. I have an interest, passion, talent. Now I need to engage with the community. I want to push it for, and it can be any of those things. It could be in medicine, could be in science, it could be in teaching, but it could also be in, I'm going more and more in that direction, is to say, how valuable will we in the future see the aim for mastery? Like, I'm sure you had to go some very rigorous methods to get better and better in cross-country running or long-distance running. That kind of mastery, right? Like where you're getting to the point where you can participate in the world championships like you did. And it could be across pretty much any kind of thing, and maybe many things that we can't even imagine these days. So I think that is potentially a currency that is very underestimated, that people that can provide access to improving towards mastery. It's not a green piece of paper that you get for that, but it could have more value than people see. So I wonder if you have some closing statement about that.
Yeah, actually, you sort of brings this thought to mind hearing you speak about this. Typically parents ask their kids, or the question that schools ask kids is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And everything's sort of centered around that, right? In my view, that's the wrong question to ask. Let's stop asking that of kids. The world is changing too rapidly to know what they want to be, and it's usually focused on what kind of job do you want to have.
Right.
I think a better question would be, how can you improve the world? How can you improve humanity? And have kids focus on opportunities around that. And I think that leads them away from a career, from a job, to something much larger that allows for them to, pursue different passions in their life. Right? It might be a combination of things. And I think ultimately that's going to be a better, deeper question for the younger generation to ponder. Because again, I'm not so sure that there's going to be any jobs, quote unquote, jobs left for anybody. There's roles for humans, though, in all this in many, many ways. And I think we just have to figure out what all that is. But to prepare kids, it's to get them to think about how they want to improve humanity. I think that to me is the ultimate question.
Yeah, very good. And I agree with you. And I have to say, until I actually got involved in the Tesla community, not just as an investor, I've become more comfortable using the term humanity, not just because Elon constantly uses it, but it is in a sense inspirational to say, why my town, my company, my little circle of the 5 successful people I kind of try to follow. So why not going big picture, right? And I always say, it's one thing if you're in India and there's 1.5 billion other Indians, or in China where you have 1.3 or 4 billion other Chinese. But when we're looking at the more common Western communities, I mean, New Zealand has 4 million, 5 million people, right? But that doesn't mean you're limited to that. If you adopt
Yeah.
a little bit more ambitious language, then you can actually get there.
And certainly there's nothing wrong with focusing on your local community and all that too. That's fine. I'm not suggesting everybody has to be helping, all the billions of people on the planet. But to me, that leads people to, doing something that perhaps is a little bit less confining and being more adaptable. I think we're all going to have to be extremely adaptable to the changes that are coming our way.
Right. Well, one of the images, and I'm a very visual person due to my previous flying career. I like the analogy to say right now, roughly, there's a puzzle with 8 billion puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look at it that way and say, okay, what's your contribution to the puzzle?
Good point.
The contribution can be very localized or whatever. It's part of the picture. And how are you planning to fit yourself in? How are you planning to contribute? How are you planning to make this picture ultimately better and better, more brilliant, more shining, more reaching out, and so forth? More in that direction, not to say you have to basically become Elon, and that's the only way to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think too that it also helps people deal with, people that might suffer from depression or anxiety. Anytime that you can take the focus off of yourself and how I feel and how I'm being impacted, and put that focus on how can I help? How can I help others? And the others might be a handful of people. It might be the whole planet, depending on how expansive you want that to be. But to me, that's a more exciting place to live rather than always be worried about how is this going to impact me. Um, and I think humanity in general is better off for it. If everybody on the planet was living to try to help others, that would make the world a pretty amazing place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only encourage, because I have the great fortune to do coaching and mentoring and consulting in a combined way, in a certain approach. And I can tell you, and I have many, many other colleagues, and I can imagine the same happens when you do your advisory services. The energy that happens when you work with somebody in one meeting, 3 meetings, 10 meetings, to identify first what do we want to accomplish, then come up with some sort of a path to get there. And you get that phone call, that email, that meeting, whatever it is, where the person that engaged with you comes back and says, doesn't even have to say it all worked out, but I'm on my way. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful that you helped me to take the first step, the third step, or ultimately the step to the goal. That energy exchange is something that I really feel everybody and think and believe everybody needs to experience that. Because as soon as you had that once, twice, at the latest at the third time, it's addictive. You want that all the time. That's what gets me up in the morning and said, why do I do this? Because I'm fortunate that I have built, I built a pretty good reserve for that drought.
Yep.
I'm still working on it, obviously. But I wouldn't necessarily have to still dig like crazy. But for that addiction to that energy, that's why I keep doing it. And that's what I tell my friends and my kids and so forth, my family, try it and you will get addicted too. And the side effect is it benefits everyone.
It's true. It's amazing. I've had a lot of different a lot of different successes in my life, and it's all been great experience. But it's been a lot more fun for me to share in the success of others and see that and help people along the way. That's been a lot more fun, a lot more rewarding than anything that I might have done personally in terms of in my running career or in my business. And so, yes, I totally agree with you. That's just a much better place to live than being focused on just yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's also when we're asking ourselves, so many people have asked me, how do I know that I make an impact? If you have those kind of situations, you don't even need to ask the question anymore.
Yep.
It doesn't even need to be put in words anymore. You immediately know, okay, I had part of that, or I made a significant contribution and impact in this other person's or group of people's life. Cool.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you again. And I know, like you said earlier, we could probably do 3 or 4 or 5 of these conversations and not run out of topics. One thing I ask people at the very end of the show, if you could meet anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Well, I think for me, at the top of the list would have to be Elon. While he and I have interacted a little bit on X, and that's great and that's fun. To have an opportunity to speak with him personally would be the ultimate experience for me. And again, I'm not a person that's into celebrity. I see Elon as really just another person, but obviously a very capable person that I have so many questions for. Right. I would love to be able to ask him some of the questions that don't get asked, the ones that I have. And so that for me would be the opportunity.
Yeah, I would love that too. I have a suspicion. I don't know if you agree with that or not. I think there could be a situation where you have a certain amount of time that was granted, and you ask one of those questions, and that will be the only one that you get an answer to. Because if you ask the right question, I believe, which we never get to see on TV, even in like the thing yesterday there with the summit and whatever. There's a question and the expectation is give me like a 30 to 60-second answer. And I think there's so much more if time was there. And a little glimpse came out with the Joe Rogan interviews.
Yeah.
But even there, you know, it could be sometimes one question and the question then becomes how many hours do you have? Cern, I know that you're not really normally out there and say, okay, I'm selling this or I'm selling this and so forth, but I'm assuming you wouldn't mind if anybody were interested to figure out what you're doing and how you're helping people. So can you tell us how can people best get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm an investment manager, a financial advisor for my own company. It's called Brilliant Advice. You can find me on X at Cern Basher, first name, last name, or on the web at brilliantadvice.net. Yeah.
Okay, and then people can book a conversation or something like that.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody. We can only work with clients that have their investments in the U.S. So that's one limitation. I know I've had a number of people reach out to me from different countries, and unfortunately, due to securities regulations in the U.S., we can only work with money that's domiciled here.
Okay, but I would say probably 90% of our clients fall into that category, and I'm assuming it's probably true for our audience too. So most of them would advise it. Well, great. Thank you so much, Cern. It was amazing. I don't know if that's okay to do it while we're still recording, but I would love to do this, again and maybe more than one more time. So thank you for making the time.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of different things that we can talk to in more depth. There's so many different things all going on at the same time here. I do think that they're all related. Right. And there are a lot of uncertainties around the outcomes for some of these things, but the implications are quite profound.
Right. And I think in the context of both of us being interested in providing a service to humanity, hopefully it's educational and inspiring for people.
Yep. Thank you, Axel.
Thank you.